Welcome back to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my co-host and dear friend, Jacob LaQuire. And it's finally here. Draft day has arrived. And this is going to be a little bit controversial, especially for some people we've even had on as guests of the podcast that choose to watch this movie as like a tradition each year. But Draft Day, the movie that came out in 2014, star-studded cast, honestly a really awful movie. Like I don't understand why they could take something that could be really well done and they're like, oh, all this is going to happen day of the draft. It's like you could stretch it from the NFL Combine, this whole big trade happening. We've seen it happen since with Jared Goff and the Rams, Bryce Young and the Panthers, where a team moves up the one and selects the quarterback. But it was too fabricated from like a storyline where it was like this isn't like ever realistic in the world we live in to where I could enjoy it as a movie. So I don't know if you've seen the movie, but for me, Draft Day just is not it.
And I haven't seen it, right? So I'm not sure what the goods and the highs and the lows are in the movie. I've heard it's not very good, and the plot behind the movie is like you're taking, what was it, a punt returner, and you're trading all these picks and then demanding that you get new picks back from a new young general manager. So maybe we see, and I think he was the general manager of a Florida team, like the guy that Kevin Costner picked on. So maybe we see the Jaguars' new general manager getting taken advantage of with trades. Who knows? But yeah, certainly been waiting long enough. It's finally here, and we're recording this mid-afternoon. So by the time this gets published and ready, we'll be out celebrating and ready for the draft.
Oh yeah. And we are ready to get into it. Like this is the Christmas that we look forward to as NFL analysts, because this is kind of what kicks off the offseason, where teams are kind of finalizing what that roster is going to look like. And you're now projecting into the next season, which most NFL fans, that's what they're waiting for. And to jump right in, the way we're going to do this is a mock draft. Both of us have our own. We'll show them on the screen for those of you watching on YouTube. And we're going to go pick by pick why we think that player should be there. There's going to be some overlap. And obviously some players that we disagree on, we probably agree on the fit there. It's just because when you start changing one or two players to certain teams, especially early on in the draft, it creates domino effects and ripple effects throughout the rest of the first round to where things change for each team based on who's available. So we'll kind of explain that as this exercise goes on. But with the first overall pick, this one seems about as scripted as any pick in this first round, and that's Cam Ward to the Tennessee Titans. This guy has, I think, earned the title of quarterback one, and rightfully so, in this year's draft class. And the Titans are going to reward him with the first overall pick. They need a guy to place behind their offensive line that they just rebuilt this offseason. And I think that's about as seamless as you can put it, outside of just talking about how creative a quarterback Cam Ward is.
Yeah, we've known that he's been the pick since the end of Miami's season, since the Miami Hurricanes, I should say. Right since they missed the college football playoff, we kind of knew at that point that Cam Ward was the guy. We just didn't know who was going to make the pick. We had to wait and see after the Patriots, who they beat the Bills, I think, in Week 18, and that shifted the order of the top 4 or 5. And then we got the Titans. There's talk about trading up, but after the Combine, all that talk kind of died. So you're right. Cam Ward's the guy, best chance to be a franchise quarterback. And Tennessee really hasn't had somebody that can bring that hope to the franchise since Steve McNair, who's like a sneaky good comparison for Ward. So pretty seamless fit there, I think.
Yeah. And so we're both in agreement there. We're in agreement with the first 3 picks. The second overall pick, it took me a while to kind of move from Abdul Carter being the pick to Travis Hunter. The only time kind of the Browns taking a cornerback over an edge actually came before Andrew Berry was the guy. I was when John Dorsey, I believe. Am I saying that right? The ex-Chiefs general manager He was the general manager when they took Baker Mayfield, and at pick 4, instead of taking Bradley Chubb, they went Denzel Ward. So a kind of similar instance here where you have a premier edge talent and a premier cornerback or wide receiver, however you see it. I think in this case, Andrew Berry looks at him as a wide receiver. And I think because he looks at him as a wide receiver, he values him a little bit more than Abdul Carter. And like you talked about today on Twitter, this is a generational talent. And you really can't pass up on a guy that's generational. And so I don't think the Browns can really get knocked for taking a guy of this caliber.
Yeah, I think they could trade if somebody blows him away, but best player in the draft pretty easily. Even if he were just a pure corner, I think he's still a better talent than Abdul Carter. And because the plus is that he can play receiver and probably start most of the time at receiver, the Browns roster, their strength is their defense already, right? So getting some juice on the offensive side, somebody who can be a true or has the ceiling to be a true wide receiver one, I think it's an easy pick there. And you're right. You don't really see receivers go this high normally, but in a weaker draft like this, makes a lot of sense.
It's really because of the generational label that's in front of wherever.
And he deserves it. We throw that around a lot, but we haven't really seen a true two-way player that can actually play receiver in the National Football League go like this. Like we've seen players in college do it, but they can't play receiver in the league because they're not good enough. People like say, they're better at corner. Champ Bailey was better at corner. He couldn't play receiver in the league, but he was an elite corner, right? I think Travis Hunter really can be a go-to weapon there, and that's where the generational part comes in. Generational receiver and really high-end corner.
I want to hold back on Champ Bailey because, one, I did not watch his college stats. I think when you and I talked about kind of the percentage of yards that each player had for their team, it was around the same percentage. Obviously, a different era of football. Just want to hold off a little bit because Champ Bailey is a Hall of Famer, a phenomenal athlete. Loved him as a cornerback. Loved playing with him as in Madden growing up. Kind of flashback there. But to get back on track, Abdul Carter to the Giants. It seems like overkill, but they put Kayvon Thibodeau on the trading block. This was a top 5 pick for him a couple of years ago. Hasn't panned out. Now you can put Abdul Carter, Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence on the field at the same time. It's electric. It's scary. The advantage that several teams, especially in the NFC East, Eagles, Commanders, are going to have the luxury of running the ball and wanting to run the ball very frequently on these New York Giants. But this is a very tantalizing defensive line, especially against the pass. And we are in an era where it is dominated by quarterbacks. So I think this is a way to go about this pick for the Giants. I think both of us have Abdul Carter here, and he really is edge one in this class. There aren't a lot of positions where there's disparity between like that top of the position and kind of the next guy up. I would say quarterback, edge, and maybe one or two other positions, but he's rightfully deserved to go here at the spot.
For sure. Stands above the rest, right? I think is what you're trying to say there. I think my next guy is James Pierce, my next edge rusher, and I think Carter's pretty clear of him. And the cool thing about Carter is he's only played edge rusher for 1 year, and he was already this good. So if you could continue that progression, the sky's really, or what did Michael Jordan say? The ceiling is the roof for Abdul Carter there. And tantalizing value, going to be able to deploy NASCAR fronts for the first time since their Super Bowl wins. So that's going to be a really, really good matchup there. You could have thought about quarterback before they signed Russ and Jameis Winston, but I think if they're going to go quarterback, it's going to be later because you can't really pass up somebody that's talented, especially at a premier position.
This draft is devoid of premier talent from picks 5 through 12. When you can get a guy of this caliber, you don't pass it up. Unless, obviously, like you said, with the Browns pick before, somebody blows you away with an offer. And maybe there is a team that wants to move up and get Abdul Carter. There have been talks this morning that the Bears are trying to move up to 3. And it's like, you'd only want to move up to 3 if you're trying to get an Abdul Carter to pair with a Montez Sweat. And like that's really the only justification for trying to make a move like that. So we'll see if there are any people that kind of put in a higher bid to go get a guy of that caliber. But at pick 4, I think While I think Armand Membu and some of the other tackles like Kelvin Banks, Josh Simmons have closed the gap in some of these evaluations, Will Campbell is still a premier left tackle. I know a lot of people think he'll really play guard at the next level because of his wingspan and his arm length, but I think this is a guy that has the ability to play against top talent. He did it at the SEC his entire college career, and I think he'll be able to take that next step. And worst comes to worst, he can slot into guard, and I think he'd be great there as well. So I think there's a lot of high upside with this pick, especially as the Patriots are rebuilding their offensive line in this new era under hold on, why am I blanking out? Mike Vrabel. There we go. Their old linebacker with Drake May at the helm. So
yeah, and I think Will Campbell is a Vrabel guy, like a nasty player, and like you said, they need O linemen everywhere, right? It's not just left tackle. So if he doesn't work out there, I think he could be a very good guard. To be clear, we both have Will Campbell with the 4th pick with the New England Patriots at this point. I think moving forward, this is where we're going to start to diverge with our selections.
And rightfully so, because we're running into teams with completely new front offices. The next 3 picks are GMs we have never seen draft a player yet. And so it's going to kick off with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Then we'll have the Las Vegas Raiders. And then we'll have the New York Jets. And so for you, who do you have the Jacksonville Jaguars taking? I think your pick is interesting because they have Joshua Hines-Allen and Trayvon Walker already on the roster.
They do have those guys, and yet their sack production, their defensive line production was quite poor. And so I think, and to be clear, I wrote this mock draft on Monday for the 2-point conversion. Obviously, rumors and stuff have changed since then. I think there's a pretty easy favorite for the number 5 pick now. But at that point in time, I wrote Jalen Walker there, the Georgia edge linebacker hybrid. And I really think that fit could work for them. A weak side linebacker cleaning up stuff that Hines-Allen might miss or Trayvon Walker might miss, or a blitzer outside of those two guys. When we talked about Walker not being an ideal fit for the Panthers, it's because they didn't have established edge rushers already at the position. The Jags have 2 established guys that have given them good production throughout both of their young careers. I was going to say rookie contracts, but Hines-Allen got extended a couple of years ago. I think Walker's the perfect guy to bring juice behind that initial front, and he can blitz up the middle to bring interior pressure. I really like the fit there, but Jacksonville has a number of different directions they can go in. So I wouldn't really blame you for picking any position other than quarterback at this point for them.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting because you have to go back to, okay, what is Gladstone's background? And so he comes from the Rams front office over to Jacksonville. And so a lot of people have made fun of him. He looks a little bit younger, quirkier. And you can get it on a guy like that. But again, coming from Les Snead and working with that Rams front office and the team they've built over the past decade has been phenomenal. So that remains to be seen. They're really about building from the trenches out. So it would not surprise me if they go defensive lineman. I know for the longest time, Mason Graham was the guy kind of comped to go there. I don't know if that's necessarily the direction. Offensive tackle could be in play here, depending on how they feel about Walker Little at left tackle. I think Armand Membu would be a fantastic left tackle. Big time investment from last offseason. But what I think they do it because Liam Cohen just came from a situation where you have a dynamic wide receiver 1 and 2 and Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, and that's Tet McMillan. And I think if you pair Tet McMillan with Brian Thomas Jr., you're going to get that 1-2 punch that you kind of see in Cincinnati. You have your wide receiver 1 dominant player, Brian Thomas. In the case of the Bengals, that's Shamar Chase. And then you have a guy that you can place as your X wide receiver that's just going to go up and turn 50-50 balls into 80-20 balls. And that's what you get with Tet McMillan. And so you now add both of those guys in an offense, and Liam Cohen is your play designer, and you have Trevor Etienne, you have Tank Bigsby coming out of the backfield. That's, I think, a really tantalizing offense for Jacksonville moving forward if they feel comfortable about the guys they have at both left and right tackle and then the interior of their defensive line. So that's kind of the direction I see at pick 5, but Tet McMillan, I think, is the choice here.
Yeah, and I like the Bengals comparison, right? Because Brian Thomas Jr. is probably, at this point, 75% of Jamar Chase, right? McMillan, one of his better comps is T. Higgins. So getting like kind of replacing that or not replacing, getting a younger version of that wide receiver duo should pay dividends for Trevor Lawrence as he tries to bounce back and have a good year this year under Liam Cohen. Next is the Raiders. Neither of us traded out of this pick, and I went kind of chalk. Ashton Genty's been the guy basically the entire process up until maybe yesterday. They're the only team that went to his pro day. Their GM has said like on 10 different press conferences that we value running backs. Ashton Genty is special and even in a deep class, so you don't necessarily need to pass on a guy like that. And he can really be, I don't want to say the mascot, but like the image of the vintage hard-nosed Raiders players. I think we talked about that during the free agency episode, how they've really fallen from that kind of image of them. Like growing up, I imagine them being like tough to play, I guess, even though they weren't winning a ton, but they would like just be tough or tough outs every week that you played them. Hasn't really been the case over recent years, but I think Ashton Genty can really bring that culture back into the building. And if there's any head coach that knows what it's like to have a really strong running back that can bounce off of tackles and go for 82-yard touchdowns, it's Pete Carroll.
It is. And I love Ashton Genty to the Raiders. It's definitely very plausible tonight. However, and this is the hang up I kind of have, is I believe the Raiders are going to go running back, tackle, or guard, or line in offensive linemen in the first 2 rounds. And so when you look at that pairing, do you go, okay, a top offensive lineman that you love, that has connections to your coaching staff and Steve Sarkisian with Pete Carroll, and getting a Kelvin Banks out of Texas, and getting a running back in the second round, maybe a Travion Henderson out of Ohio State, the pair with Chip Kelly, who coached him last year. All of a sudden, that makes a little bit more sense just from college connections, and that pairing looks good. Or you could have like an Ashton Genty, and then you could take Ursery out of Minnesota as the pairing. And I think either one of those could potentially work. But that's where I think you're kind of at with the Raiders, is what pairing do you think is best for you moving forward? In my opinion, taking Kelvin Banks with the coaching connections makes a ton of sense from a schematic standpoint. But I completely understand taking the best player here in Ashton Genty and worrying about the offensive line in later rounds.
So would you kick Banks into guard with Colton Miller there, or would you try him on the right side?
I would, to get the most value, try him at the right tackle spot. But honestly, Colton Miller, there's some contract disputes. You could play him at left guard and then kick him out the left tackle if things don't work out with Colton Miller. And hopefully he's the future there, and you don't have to rush him into that spot. You can kind of develop him there. But that would also kind of, you have Jackson Powers-Johnson as your center. You would then have Kelvin Banks as your left guard. And at left tackle, you have Colton Miller. I feel really confident about that. And then putting a running back behind that, rather than getting Ashton Genty and then trying to figure out how are we going to plug the holes.
For sure. I could see the vision there. And there's been a lot of steam over the past couple of days of Banks being a late riser. I don't want to put myself out there, but I've been a Banks defender for pretty much the entire process. I thought people were low on him just because of the 2 Georgia games. He's had a really good career at Texas, and it wouldn't surprise me to see him going this high. The Jets are the next team. They could be a Kelvin Banks team as well, but we both went defense, just different players. I went Mason Graham. He was the best talent on the board left for me at this point. I think putting him beside Quinnen Williams and then Will McDonald and Jermaine Johnson on the outside, that's probably the best young defensive front in the entire league, with the potential to just be the best outright within a year or so. Just a ton of pass rushing prowess with that group. And I think Aaron Glenn, coming from Detroit, where they didn't have that. They just had Aiden Hutchinson, and like, all right, guys, go try to take up space so Hutchinson can win his ones. I think he's really going to want to reinforce his defensive line so that Sauce Gardner has an easier time on the back end.
Like, can you name a couple of the Jets edge rushers outside of Jermaine Johnson and Will McDonald? That's kind of where I think this team is left, is that the depth there is a little bit more concerning. And the new general manager, Darren Mugi, coming from the Denver Broncos over the past couple of years with George Payton, has drafted some undersized edge rushers. Now, like you said, we're in disagreement on who that guy is. You already have Jalen Walker off the board going to Jacksonville. And if that's the case, he can't get drafted here. But I think that connection with the Denver Broncos, how vocal of a leader Jalen Walker is, and how he can be a tone setter for Aaron Glenn on that defense. And you start looking at some of the other young guys on that defense and how he doesn't have to be the main guy at linebacker, with Sherwood just recently extended. Like, I feel like that could be an exciting pairing, because I think that allows Jalen Walker to do what he did at Georgia. Be a quarterback spy with some of these mobile quarterbacks and a Drake May, a Josh Allen. Be a pass rusher on third downs. Those things that he did so well at Georgia continue allowing him to do. And I think he can be allowed to do that in Aaron Glenn's and Steve Wilkes' defense in New York. So I'm excited about that pairing. I really do think that connection is legit. And it lines up. I mean, when you look at the Denver Broncos, when they draft Nick Bonito and Jonah Ellis, guys that are under 6'3", under 240 pounds, when they're getting drafted, that lines up with exactly some of the measurements we're seeing for Jalen Walker.
Drew Sanders as well was a middle linebacker edge hybrid.
Yeah, it was.
Arkansas.
Yeah.
But all
the
people you listed, none of them were first rounders, if I recall correctly. And part of that was they didn't have first rounders because they wanted to give them away for Russell Wilson. But that is something to monitor there. Pick 8 belongs to the Carolina Panthers, but both of us traded out of those spots. And it's not just selfishly because we're Panthers fans and we want extra picks. Obviously, we want that. But throughout the process, when Dan Morgan has spoken, he's used language which indicates that the 8th overall pick is for sale. Like he said, if we're stuck at pick 8, I'm sure we'll get a good player. To me, he's not like messing up or like accidentally saying they want to trade back. To me, it's like, all right, guys, if you want to trade up, if you want Genty or somebody, come get him. Like, that's kind of the thing they're saying. So I think it's prudent that we both have the Panthers trading out of that spot.
But you already have Genty gone. So who's moving up to get who? Because now Genty's not on the board. You don't have this generational prospect.
What's the most important position in all of football? It's the quarterback.
But is it worth the top 10 pick? And are the Saints really going to take whoever they're going to move up and get? That's my question here for you before you introduce the first trade of this mock draft.
And I'll answer it for you. If you are willing to take a quarterback at any point in the first round, you should be willing to take them at the first overall pick. That's my philosophy. If you think that somebody can be a franchise guy that you want to use a first round pick on, and you believe that another team might also take that player, then you should be willing to go get him. And setting the stage there, I'm just going to say my trade real quick, and then you can say your point. But Pittsburgh has been connected to quarterbacks throughout this entire process. They're like the last team that needs a QB in the entire league outside of Tennessee. Like, if you look at every depth chart with QBs, theirs is probably the worst. And so they move up for a QB. A couple of days ago, Shedeur Sanders was on, I think it was Max Crosby's podcast, and Crosby asked, what's the Mount Rushmore of quarterback to receiver connections? And Sanders says, Tom Brady to Gronk, obviously, is up there. Aaron Rodgers to Devontae Adams is up there. I don't recall. I think he said like Breeze to Jimmy Graham or something was the third one. And then for the fourth one, he said, well, whoever's throwing to DK Metcalf and George Pickens, probably that guy. To me, that's along the same line as Cam Ward during a Fortnite stream saying, Calvin Ridley and Treylon Burks, those are top receivers in the league. That's like, those are the alarm bells I'm getting. So I think he's really connected with the Steelers. Steelers don't have a second round pick, so they can't wait till round 2 to get Sanders. So I think they move up ahead of the Saints, who are like the other quarterback team. And they give up some stuff like a third this year and a future first or a future third. And then they take Shedeur Sanders at 8.
So I personally, I think Shedeur Sanders, and me and Jacob have a side bet that he will fall out of the first round. And he may get taken at the end of the first round, but top 10 is just way too rich, because I think when you compare him to quarterback prospects before him, I think he's very comparable to a Kenny Pickett. And we didn't see Kenny Pickett go until the 20s. And that's exactly where the Steelers are. So I get the Pittsburgh connection, but I think if he's going to get selected, the Steelers would just take him outright at 21. I do have the Steelers kind of moving up, swapping a player for some picks to get them a second round, whether that's a Jalen Milroe, whether that is Shador. I think that's when they take a quarterback or they use that second round pick that they acquire in a trade we'll talk about in a little bit to then move up and get their guy. I just don't think they feel convicted enough from a talent perspective. And then after getting burned from a guy of Kenny Pickett's talent level recently, of doing that again. When they know Aaron Rodgers is sitting there in free agency waiting for this draft to play out. And if you play your cards right and you add enough talent and you feel secure about him being the quarterback and Mason Rudolph being your backup, you can ride this out for another year while you figure out the quarterback situation. So in this case, I do have the Panthers moving back from 8, but I have the San Francisco 49ers moving up to select arguably the best defensive lineman left on the board and Mason Graham. And you go, Steven, why don't you have the Carolina Panthers taking Mason Graham? And I'll tell you for one reason. Nearly every single pick that the Panthers have made, especially with Dan Morgan in the room, and especially since they've added Dave Canales, they have had contact with a lot of the guys they've taken. There is no 30 visit with Mason Graham this year. Not a single visit with this defensive lineman. So, the guy that they've done arguably the most homework anyone has done on any prospect, or for this particular prospect, and that's Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss. Dane Brugler reported this on The Athletic this morning, and that's kind of cool because that's kind of what we were doing with Xavier Legette last year. But Walter Nolan isn't considered by a lot of teams to be that guy. Mason Graham, by consensus, is ranked a little bit higher. So in this case, the Panthers take the gamble that Walter Nolan will be there at pick 11, and the 49ers trade up to pick 8 to get Mason Graham to pair him with Nick Bosa to be a good run fitter at that 3-tech spot and help secure the interior of their defensive line. So you have the Steelers moving up and selecting a quarterback. I have the 49ers trading, and really what they're doing is they're swapping second-round picks. So we aren't picking at 57. We're picking at 43. So at this point, we can feel more comfortable about the player we're getting in the second round while still getting a player that we really, really like in the first. So with the 8th overall pick, I have Mason Graham going to the 49ers. And so that means the New Orleans Saints are now on the clock. So Shador's off the board. Do they go quarterback for you? In my case, I have them taking who I think is the best player available and fixes a position of need.
We both went with this player, I believe, Armand Membu, the Missouri right tackle, I should say. Both of us gave him to the Saints. He may go earlier on draft night. I think we're going to see a run of tackles within the first 10. But like you're saying, best player available. The Saints team, to me, the Saints have the worst roster in the league, just horrible. And a big part of that is the trenches, both offense and defense. They've tried to do it. They took a tackle in the first round last year, moving to the left side. Ryan Ramczyk, who didn't play last year, is now retired. So they're going to need a right tackle at some point. They didn't pick up Trevor Penning's 5th-year option. So just give him the best tackle that's left on the board in Armand Membu. Best right tackle, I should say. And just build that offensive line and try to have something in place for whoever your next QB is.
Yeah. And Armand Membu, like you said, he's a right tackle from college. He'll slot in there. You have Fuaga, who you drafted in last year's draft class, who's your left tackle. And that really, I think, solidifies those two ends. You feel comfortable about some of the interior pieces. And like you said, whoever is going to be that quarterback, you feel more comfortable about moving forward. And if Derek Carr doesn't play this year and you have backup quarterback play, that means you're probably going to have a top 5 pick. And Archie Manning could enter the draft. And I know everybody's against, the NFL is scripted, but I don't know anything that could be more scripted than Archie Manning going to play for the New Orleans Saints, just like his granddad did. So just something to monitor over the next 365 days.
Him going to play for the Giants where his uncle played, that might be more scripted. I don't know.
Maybe. I'm just saying, like, the Saints haven't gotten any of this kind of Manning aura since Archie Manning left the building. So to get it back again, especially since you just hired Kellen Moore, who could be kind of gearing up for them drafting that quarterback, we'll see. That's all I'm going to throw out there. But we both have Membo going at 9. At 10, you have Genty coming off the board already, so he's not available here. But I think right now, when you look at best player available, and arguably kind of helps build what was built in Detroit for Ben Johnson, I think they get Ashton Genty. I think he pairs very nicely to DeAndre Swift. The offensive line that they have in front of them is good enough to work at the NFL level and just adds another skill position player on that arsenal of weapons for Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams to work with.
If he's there, it's a home run pick. I just don't think he's going to be there. And so for me, I gave them Tyler Warren, the Penn State tight end. And my biggest criticism of Warren is that a lot of his stuff were gimmick touches this past year at Penn State. Like he had a great year and everything. He was the offense because they committed to him being that offense. But how often do you see a tight end having those gimmick touches in the NFL? Well, I've seen it once with Detroit last year and the year before with Sam Laporta. And so the new head coach, Ben Johnson, I think if there's any team that's going to use Warren in a unique enough way to warrant him being such a high pick, it's going to be the Chicago Bears. And I really love the matchup there between head coach and new player. If Genty's there, I can't imagine he makes it past the Bears, but to me, he was already gone. So I give them probably the most versatile offensive weapon in the draft.
I think from a Yak standpoint, you're right about being a versatile player. But like you said, there's so much that has to be schemed up and are almost like gimmick type plays. And I feel like if you aren't Ben Johnson, if you aren't from the Shanahan coaching tree, or if you aren't Sean Payton, which technically Ben Johnson comes from more of a Sean Payton coaching background, that you have these guys that know how to use tight ends. And so obviously that's the connection here with the Bears. Honestly, a guy I'm going to throw out there just in case he's there, well, we talked about Kelvin Banks with the Raiders. I think if they take Genty, Kelvin Banks is at play here. I don't know if they're necessarily super sold on their left tackle play and can be looking to kind of reinforce that just like they did in the offseason leading up to the draft. So I think whatever the pick ends up being, it's going to be a position of value in terms of a offensive tackle, maybe edge rusher, or it's going to be best player available with an Ashton Genty. So either way you slice it, I think they're going to get better. And that leads us into pick 11. In my case, this is where the Panthers are picking because they're trade with the San Francisco 49ers. I have them taking a guy that you turned me on to, Jacob, and I've been praising his name ever since, but that's Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss. This guy, when you turn on the highlights, he's arguably the best player in this draft class in terms of like prospect, or at least at his position. It's all those lows that come with those highs and not him being consistent. And so hopefully Dan Morgan and the crew get him to play at a more consistent level, working next to Derek Brown and other consummate pros on that defensive line, hopefully gets him to churn the gears a little bit more, and he becomes a productive player here in Carolina for years to come.
Yeah, I think I'm the only person who has him in their top 5, at least that I've seen. And it's just because when I rank players, I believe in their upside, because I think if you select a player, you try to extract the maximum value out of each player. You're not going to succeed every time, but I think if you're betting on a player, you need to look at their highs. And Nolan's highs are really high. I like that there. For me, the 49ers are still picking, and Kelvin Banks is still available. Their O-line is like sneaky bad. Right now, the 49ers, they lose Aaron Banks, their guard, to Green Bay, I think. Trent Williams is only getting older, and the rest of their O-line just kind of stinks. So you could play Kelvin Banks at left guard, and then he can be the eventual replacement to Trent Williams in a similar way that you kind of have him doing that with Colton Miller and the Raiders. That's the direction I went in with the Niners, because if they're going to pay Purdy, they need to protect him. So I think reinforcing that offensive line is going to be important.
Mm-hmm. No, that was a mock that I had for the longest time until I kept hearing all these rumors over the past couple of weeks that, hey, there's going to be like 3 offensive tackles taken in the top 10. Maybe they aren't taken in the top 10, but it was that kind of clued me into, okay, maybe the Raiders aren't sold at running back, and a few of these other teams that have tackle needs and concerns are going to scoop them up before the 49ers can get there. So I definitely think if they stay at 11, Kelvin Banks is there. That's the pick. At pick 12 now, this is where things kind of get spicy. My big trade, or big trade number 2 that comes off the board, the Steelers are done with the headache that is George Pickens. His last month of play last year was completely disheartening. He was unplugged, disconnected from the team. They're done with it. They send him to the Dallas Cowboys, who are unsure of taking a guy like Matthew Golden with a 12th overall pick. They need wide receiver help. They need somebody next to CeeDee Lamb. And so they make a big splash play. Their division rival got a big analytics office. They hired even more analysts. The Eagles went out and traded for A.J. Brown. They're going to go out and trade for somebody who's a little bit sicker in the head and has maybe even some more big play potential in George Pickens. So I think what happens here from a trade standpoint is the Cowboys send pick 12 and then their second round pick, which I believe is pick 44. And in return, they get George Pickens and the Steelers' first round, which is pick 21. The compensation for that comes out to being a late first. And we've seen that be the value for A.J. Brown, Hollywood Brown, some other wide receivers traded day of the draft. So I think it meets kind of all those standards. It gives the Steelers another dart to throw, like I talked about earlier in the second round for a quarterback. And at pick 12, what the Steelers do is they draft Cam Hayward's replacement. Now, some of you guys are saying, well, Cam Hayward back in 2011 got drafted with the 31st overall pick. And I would tell you you're absolutely right. But he's 30 pounds lighter than Derek Harmon is coming out as a rookie, which is crazy from a size comparison. And then the second thing is in 2011, there are about 10 or 15 more elite prospects than there are in this entire class. And then you add that with all the quarterbacks we're taking. Now, all of a sudden, we're talking about 15 to 20 slots. You take that away, all of a sudden, a player of Cam Hayward's caliber is in the teens. And so I think Derek Harmon out of Oregon kind of starts this defensive tackle or interior defensive lineman almost run here at 12.
I can see the vision with your trade. For me, the Cowboys don't need to do that because Ted McMillan is still on the board. Matthew Golden's been popular here, but I actually think McMillan fits with CeeDee Lamb better. I think he can be the boundary sideline winner and use his size to be more of a threat down the field, which can open stuff up underneath for CeeDee Lamb. I also think he's just a better overall player than Matthew Golden is. So Jerry Jones wants a big-time player, big-time skill player. He's going to get him with Ted McMillan.
And if Ted McMillan's here, and I think this really is kind of his floor, it's like, this is like Ashton Genty, Ted McMillan, like a couple prospects like floor, I feel is the Dallas Cowboys, this pick 12. And I think if either of those players are here at 12, they take them. Unfortunately, neither are. And like I said, I feel like that the player Matthew Golden is, you really take a player like that in the 20s, not the teens. And so that's where you kind of trade back to where you can take a player and feel good about it. And in this case, the Steelers are happy to be suitors because they still get a first round talent while still having a dart to throw at the quarterback position. So with that, we're moving. Actually, no, you haven't talked about your pick 12, have you?
Ted McMillan is my pick 12.
Oh, yes, that's right, with the Cowboys. I'm so pick 13, the Miami Dolphins. This pick stays with the Miami Dolphins for both of us. We go 2 different defensive positions, both of whom are Kenneth Grant. Their nose tackle is a undrafted free agent pretty much. And I think they would really like to actually build some depth there, especially with the departure of, I believe, Calais Campbell this past year. But no, he was with like the Falcons. He was with the Dolphins.
He went back to the Cardinals. Yeah.
This past year, but last year he was with them.
Yeah. In free agency, he went to the Cardinals. I can see the fit there. I think Grant's a bit more limited in what he can do. I think to start his career, he's going to be like mostly a nose tackle. And so I went versatility as opposed to limitations with Jahdae Barron, the DB from Texas. He can play nickel. He can play safety for them as well. They just lost Javon Holland to free agency, and he can move outside when you need him to. He's not going to beat Tet McMillan sized people on 50-50 balls, so you have to use him sparingly there. But now that Jalen Ramsey is on the trade block, I think they need DBs more than ever. And I think Barron can fill a lot of roles for them as they're trying to stay competitive I was about to say NFC East, AFC East. That's going to be more and more competitive with Drake May coming up and with the Bills still being the Bills.
I think both picks can be justified. Will Johnson, I think, is still on the board for both of us. So whether it's cornerback, whether it's defensive line, more specifically interior defensive line. And I didn't really bring this up earlier, but if Mason Graham were to slide, Christian Wilkins and Aaron Donald, both undersized defensive linemen over the past decade or so, were both taken with a 13th overall pick. And that's what the Dolphins have here. So would not be surprised. Mason Graham slides. People are not happy with necessarily him being a little bit undersized and kind of warranting a top 10 pick. And he falls right in the lap of the Miami Dolphins, who, believe it or not, he is, I wouldn't say a carbon copy, but plays very similar to Christian Wilkins, who they let walk in free agency. So you talk about a guy that you're able to replace a year after losing him. That's pretty cool. So we'll see if that ends up being the case. At 14, we both for the Indianapolis Colts. And what their general manager, Chris Ballard, does is he prefers athleticism over production. In the case of last year's first overall pick, he wanted both with Laitu Latu. However, he was looking past an injury concern. And so that kind of got the wheels churning at first. And I was like, oh, he'd be interested in a Josh Simmons. But I don't think they really need as much on the tackles as they do on the interior of the offensive line. And so, especially looking at that right guard spot opposite Quentin Nelson, this is where I think a Gray Zabel works great from North Dakota State. This is a guy from a Roz standpoint, stands about 9.5, and we're talking from like an offensive tackle standpoint. Now, if you move him in the guard, those numbers probably go up even a little bit higher. And so while it might be a little rich taking a guard at 14, when you look at how some of these guards have been paid recently, north of 20 plus million, they're almost more valuable than cornerbacks, tight ends, or maybe some of these other prospects that are either better from a general grade standpoint or maybe better athletes. I think in this case, it makes a lot of sense for Chris Ballard trying to keep this offense on track, whether it's Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones at the helm.
I don't think the offense is going to be on track, quite frankly, with those two QBs. And I think they have a much bigger need on the defensive side of the ball at the linebacker spot. They did a good job addressing the secondary, and they've invested in their front with draft capital throughout Chris Ballard's tenure. But the linebacker spot's just really rough. And I think you bringing up them looking past Latu's injury concern resonates well with me because I'm giving them Jihad Campbell, who's a top 10 player for me, best linebacker in the class, in my opinion, but he's going to have labrum surgery, which is your shoulder, and that's going to take some time to recover. Once he's back healthy, he can be a cornerstone piece on their defense. But yeah, I really think they need linebackers. Like, this is the perfect prospect to team fit out of all the picks I've done so far, other than Cam Ward, obviously. But I can see the interior offensive line being addressed, but I really think they need to work on that defense because Shane Steichen should be able to get something out of the offense. If he can't, then it's kind of on him. He got, 9 wins with Gardner Minshew a couple years ago. He should be able to pull some wins with Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones. So I think they're going to continue to build the defense and stay competitive because this is probably Chris Ballard's last rodeo. So if they're not competitive this year, I think this is it for him.
Yeah, and I think he was allowed to be aggressive in free agency. We saw that with him addressing the secondary. I think Jihad Campbell makes a lot of sense. I think this is really where people start talking about Jihad Campbell coming off the board. I have him going a little bit later. I completely understand him being the guy there, especially with their linebacking room. However, I do think they can also address that position in the second and third round with some of the guys we've talked about before. So it's one of those kind of choose your poison. Do you want a solid offensive lineman or do you want a solid linebacker kind of build around moving forward? At pick 15, we have another division rival with the Atlanta Falcons. We have them going both defense here. I just don't think Terry Fontenot cares about the edge position. I really don't. I thought it was about as scripted as it could be last year. Taking Dallas Turner, he takes Michael Penix. And that worked out. Kirk Cousins ended up turning into a pumpkin, and you were able to start the rookie, and he showed signs down the stretch that he could maybe be the franchise guy. So, all right, that paid off. Still, I don't think in a deep edge class, they're going to address it in the first round. I think their mindset is, hey, there are going to be guys available later, and we take those guys on day 2. So they go a different position. They find their cornerback to pair with their cornerback 1. Who is their cornerback 1 again? It's not Alford anymore. It's
AJ Terrell.
Is it Terrell? Yeah, because Trufant's no longer there. So it's AJ Terrell that they just paid and extended. He's one of the top paid corners. And so you'd be pairing Will Johnson with him on that back end. I think that would be good, especially with some of the zone schemes that the Falcons like deploying under Raheem Morris. This is a good zone corner, and I think would fit the bill. So you talk about a guy that's going to come in and be a day 1 starter and be an instant contributor. I think that's Will Johnson here for the Atlanta Falcons.
I actually did give them an edge rusher. They can't keep putting it off forever. They've had the least amount of sacks the last 5, 10, and 20 years. Just horrible defensive line. So I gave them probably the most athletic edge rusher in Shamar Stewart. He's a bit of a gamble, but if he pays off, he could be like a real piece along their defensive line for years to come. Will Johnson is interesting because at pick 16, the Arizona Cardinals, that's where I ended up putting him. They invested a lot in their defensive front in free agency with Josh Sweat, Dalvin Tomlinson, but now they need like a strong corner to be their corner 1. That's where I had them taking Will Johnson, and Jonathan Gannon should understand how important corners can be because he came from a system that had quite a few good ones while he was there in Philly.
Yeah. So I love the pairing there. They have Sean Murphy Bunting. They just drafted, is it Mo Melton or Bo Melton? Is it Mo Melton? I think it's Max Melton. Max Melton. So I just not doing well with coaches and players' names today. Those two are the starters out there in Arizona. I think they are okay with them being cornerback 1 and 2, but you could always upgrade. And we saw them upgrade the defensive line already in free agency with Josh Sweat and a few other signings. So I can definitely see Will Johnson, if he falls here, being the pick for the Arizona Cardinals. However, I think they have a massive hole at right tackle, and they have an affinity for Ohio State tackles. They drafted Paris Johnson in the top 10 a couple of years ago. I think they draw Josh Simmons here at 16. They also have Marvin Harrison Jr. from last year. So this would make it 3 consecutive years that they spend a first rounder on an Ohio State prospect. Obviously, there's some injury concerns, but the doctors have cleared him. I think he had the most bench presses of a tackle prospect this year, just slammed him out. This is a strong guy, and I think will help the Cardinals to continue to take a step on offense with some of their weapons that they have.
Yeah, and I think he played right tackle at San Diego State, so it's not a huge leap if he ends up with the Cardinals there. 17, Cincinnati. They need defense, right? They've been paying their offensive stars, maybe turning a new leaf with paying people, but they still haven't paid Trey Henderson, their star edge rusher. So I think we both gave them help along the defensive line. I went Derek Harmon, who is still available. He's versatile. He can play a number of spots for them. He just needs to clean up his finishing a little bit. But I think he's going to be a good piece there, especially if they're able to retain Henderson. I think that's a good pairing on either side of the line when they're bringing pass rush. I think that'd be a really good fit.
Derek Harmon makes a lot of sense. Unfortunately, I have the Steelers taking him almost like 5-6 picks ahead of this. So I think the Bengals, and I wouldn't say telegraphed how they like their edges, but when you look at them signing Sam Hubbard, Trey Hendrickson, drafting Miles Murphy, these are guys that are 6'5", 260 plus pounds, similar to how like the Carolina Panthers address the edge position. I think in this case, a Mikael Williams, especially with his length, makes a lot of sense, especially when they had an issue defending the run. You can pair him on early downs with Trey Hendrickson, allow him to learn as he's kind of getting older and aging as a veteran on that team. and it might give you instant production in year one. So both of us, like you said, had defensive linemen going here. I think Mikael Williams makes a ton of sense for them at pick 17.
For sure. And then the Seahawks, I think they need offensive weapons. I have them sticking and picking Colston Loveland. I think he'll go earlier on draft night, but the Seahawks took his teammate AJ Barner last year, a Michigan tight end. So reuniting them, giving Darnold a strong tight end duo, I think is going to be good for the future of the Seahawks. You could talk about receivers here as well, but I think Loveland is probably the best consensus pass catcher left on the board, and so that's kind of the direction I went in for the Seahawks.
The Seahawks trade back. I don't think they're necessarily super excited about the defensive prospects that are here. They have a bunch of day 2 capital that I think they're going to address the offensive line, wide receivers, and they may choose to still do that in the first, but I have them trading down with the Houston Texans. The reason why I have the Houston Texans trading up is I don't think they're done with kind of doing the overhaul on the offensive line, and they want to add a vocal leader to that room. And obviously the ties with DeMeco Ryans to Alabama. Heck, you can throw Will Campbell in there, or not Will Campbell. Dallas. No, hold on. Who am I blanking out on? Will Anderson. Yep, have Will the Will Anderson. Right. Have the there we go. Calling him Will Campbell, the guy who's already been drafted by the New England Patriots. But Will Anderson, the ties to Alabama there, I think really solidifies him being a Houston Texan. They move up to pick 18. I think they send a 3rd round pick. It's like pick 89 on part of that swap. A lot of these drafts or trades that I'm proposing during the first round accumulate to like a 4th round pick, because I think the value of moving up or moving down is not as much because the value in this draft is not as high. So I think we're going to see trades at a much lower price than we typically do because it's a buyer's draft. So we'll see if that plays out. That's kind of how I have some of the comparison broken down in terms of that. Tyler Booker's who I have at 18. At 19, you already have him going to the Indianapolis Colts, but I have Jahad Campbell going to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They've spent a lot of first-round picks on the front 7 and the offensive line over the past couple of years. I don't think that changes. I think they take the best player still on the board in Jahad Campbell. He has versatility not only playing the linebacker spot at a much higher level than they saw Devin White, but he has the ability to rush the passer as well. And so I think that kind of combo pairing with Todd Bowles' unique blitz schemes could be very fun to watch in years to come.
I also gave them best player left, but a versatile defensive back in Malachi Starks. They already have Antoine Winfield, but I think pairing both of those guys along the back end can really work as a good duo to clean up everything in front of them. And I think they do invest a lot in the front 7, but having invested so much there, I think gives them a chance to go in a different direction. And so I lean Starks at that position. Pick 20, I think we both have Omarion Hampton, the North Carolina running back, going to Denver. This one seems pretty chalky. It's not common that this late in the process or this late in the mock draft that we each have the same pick for each one. But I just like the Hampton fit there. You mentioned earlier how Sean Payton likes to use tight ends. He also likes to use running backs, right? He builds his offense from the inside out, which is a pretty unique way to do it. And they don't really have a premier running back there. So Omarion Hampton is the choice for me.
Yeah. Javonte Williams leaves in free agency. I think he signs with the Dallas Cowboys on like a 1-year deal. And you replace him with another North Carolina Chapel Hill product in Omarion Hampton. I think he's the only other running back that's going to go in the first round and rightfully deserves it. This is a complete tailback that I think will really elevate the Broncos offense, especially on rundowns. And when you pair him with other guys like a Leo McLaughlin and Audric Estime, I think you have the perfect change of pace running back room and really complement each other. So we're both in agreement there at 20. Seems like a pretty scripted pick. We'll see if that's the case come tonight. At 21, you have the Panthers now picking because they traded back with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Who are they taking there? And is it somebody that they were tied to throughout this draft process, or is this somebody new?
Well, they were tied to his teammate, Jalen Walker, but here they're going to pick Michael Williams. You mentioned it earlier. They don't like the little edge rushers. They like their traditional defensive ends, 6'5", 260, that can fit the run first and rush the passer later. It's exactly what Michael Williams is. Already a high-level run defender, and if he can get healthy and go up to his athletic potential, he can be a game wrecker as a pass rusher. So I think the Panthers are happy that they're able to land the guy that they've probably been looking at this entire process at pick 21.
Both of us had the Steelers trading the 21st overall pick. You had the Steelers moving up to 8. I had the Steelers moving up to 12. The Cowboys are now picking for me at pick 21. And you know something Jerry Jones messed up a long time ago when he passed on a kid out of Marshall with some character concerns? History has a chance to be corrected. And so Jerry Jones, ecstatic with how the teams played out in terms of the picks and the selections, now gets to bring in Mike Green. You have Dante Fowler signed to a one-year deal, but now moving forward, you're going to have Mike Green and Micah Parsons, terrifying quarterbacks off the edge. And that is where I see the 21st pick playing out. The Dallas Cowboys adding yet another dominant pass rusher after extending Ozeadua in the offseason to kind of secure. I wouldn't say secure. They still need help in the interior of the defensive line, but I think that can be addressed with either future picks or free agents left on the board. At pick 22, I have the Los Angeles Chargers selecting a player with ties to the front office. And I don't think this comes as a surprise, but I have them taking Colston Loveland out of Michigan. You've said it before. He was arguably their best offensive player this past year, maybe even last year when they made their championship run. And so when you have a player of that caliber and his versatility paired with a Ladd McConkey, I think you can work with that. And so I think because of the ties with Jim Harbaugh and just the way the Chargers want to play the football and being a physical team, I think this fits the bill. Greg Roman, Joe Hortez, what they've done and what we've seen from them in the past, that this pick makes sense. Could they go a wide receiver here? Absolutely. But for me, I think they go Loveland here and they don't overthink the pick. Unfortunately for you, Loveland's already off the board, so they can't do that. So are they taking a wide receiver? Are they going defense? How are the Chargers addressing needs on the team?
Yeah, they're taking a receiver. They don't normally do this, but Matthew Golden makes it to this point. I think he matches well with McConkey. He can be the deep threat, can take some of the pressure off of him underneath. He can be kind of what they envisioned for Quentin Johnston. Obviously, it didn't work out, but if the ceiling of Golden hits, Golden and McConkey can be one of the better young receiver duos for Justin Herbert. We saw that he needed weapons toward the end of last season. That playoff loss was embarrassing. So I think the Chargers deviating from their well, I can't say deviating because they took Quentin Johnston in the first round a couple years ago. They just take somebody that might be able to catch the ball this time in the first round pick with their first round pick.
Again, it's a different general manager. And the ties to Baltimore, we've seen them go wide receiver every other draft recently. And we'll talk about that in a little bit with the Ravens pick coming up. But here at pick 22, we have the Green Bay Packers. And they're notorious for taking defensive players and completely ignoring the offensive side of the ball. For me, I don't think there's a lot of offensive line prospects they could go. They obviously took Jordan Morgan out of Arizona last year. That's the direction they took with their first pick. I think here in this case, they go defense. And for me, this guy hasn't come off the board. He's an athletic freak. I think fits the bill to what we saw them taking like a Lucas Van Ness a couple years ago and some of these other just athletes over production. Again, similar to what we saw with the Colts is that they want their athletes. And so the Packers take Shamar Stewart here at pick 23. For you, you have them taking the guy I want Carolina taking.
Yeah, Walter Nolan slides this far, you could say. And I think that's a perfect Packers pick. They tend to chase the upside like I was talking about with Nolan. And there's no greater upside left on the board than with Walter Nolan. and he fits the need, right? Even though their defense got better with a new defensive coordinator last year, I think their defensive front was pretty disappointing. So I think a lot of popular picks have been like Shamar Stewart, James Pierce Jr., but here they're lucky that Walter Nolan is able to slide and make it to them at pick 23.
24, the Minnesota Vikings are on the clock. For
Are
me,
they?
I have them staying here. We'll talk about what you have the Vikings doing in a second. For me, they're on the clock, and they are going to take somebody with this pick. And in this case, he came off the board with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And this seems to be the case. It's like some of the players that I have going a little bit earlier, you have going a little bit later, and vice versa. But in this case, Malachi Starks is still on the board. And we saw Cam Bynum leaving free agency. Harrison Smith's not getting any younger. Brian Flores, after addressing the interior of the defensive line this past offseason with Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen, I think you need to get your Swiss Army knife on the back end. You need to get your version of Brian Branch to compete in the NFC North. And so he takes Malachi, or I shouldn't say Brian Flores does, Kweze takes Malachi Starks to help complement what they're building in that defense. And I think it's going to play out really well if they land Malachi Starks tonight.
I think that's a really good fit for them. Can you do something for me? Can you like hold up your hand to the camera and then count to 4? It's this many fingers. That's how many picks that the Vikings have in the entire draft, not just tonight. So I think that they want to trade back, collect some capital, have more darts to throw, and more rookie scale contracts to work around because they do have the rookie QB. And so I have them heading out of the first round. They're going to collect the 33rd overall pick, a very coveted pick, right? The first pick of day 2. And in that spot, the Cleveland Browns move back into the first, and they finally get their QB instead of wasting the second overall pick on it. Now, who could that be? Well, it's not going to be Tyler Shuck. I can tell you that much. I know there's been some Tyler Shuck fans on Twitter. I am not among that group. So that leaves Jackson Dart or Jalen Milroe. And do you know who the Browns' offensive coordinator is? It would be.
Well, they fired Ken Dorsey, or
Yep.
they parted ways. So I don't actually know who the new OC is.
It was their tight ends coach this past year, one Tommy Reese, who was the 2023
right.
coordinator for Alabama, where Jalen Milroe had his best season. And so if he's able to get Milroe in the building, work with him. They don't have to start Milroe because they brought Joe Flacco back in. They traded for Pickett. Like they have options there at starter. But I don't think any QB has more upside than Milroe in this class, just based on his floor as an athlete. So if they can get him in the building, marinate him a little bit, and have a familiar face working with him, that can be a guy for the future that they can bring a lot of value out of. And getting back into the first round and leapfrogging some of the other teams like the Giants or the Saints that might want to trade back in, I think the Vikings are very amenable to moving out of the first round. So I think the parameters I set were pick 33 and their third round pick to the Vikings for pick 24 and a sixth round pick. I think the Vikings take that all day to get 2 extra top 100 picks in pursuit of building their team. And the Browns get their guy that they believe can be the future of their franchise.
This wouldn't be the first time that I think they've traded back or traded kind of into the 20s to pick a quarterback. Johnny Manziel, Brandon Whedon, excellent examples of that. The Brandon Whedon example would be similar to a Tyler Shuck selection. Not saying that's the direction Andrew Berry is going to go there. I do like the Tommy Reese connection. I wasn't aware of that. I know that obviously Mike Tomlin loves the kid, a lot to love about him. And then there's been some intrigue from Sean McVay. And I think when you look at the Rams offense, that would be the next evolution. I think they are building an offense that could be designed around a mobile quarterback. And so it's just a couple teams to monitor with Jalen Milroe, whether it's the end of the first round or day 2. I think there is going to be a savvy team that knows what they're doing with him, and he'll have the opportunity to flourish in a couple of years. At pick 25, in this case, Texans didn't move for you, so they're picking here. For me, the Seahawks moved with the Texans, got some extra draft capital, didn't feel rushed about where they had to go in the first round. And so now, after not forcing anything, a wide receiver has fallen in their lap. And only well, I'll say two because I count Travis Hunter as a wide receiver. Only two wide receivers have come off the board. And this is the third one, and it's going to be Matthew Golden, who I think pairs really nicely with Jackson Smith and Jigba. And I think that pairing is going to help Sam Darnold. You have two people that complement each other from a route standpoint really well. And I think you have two players that do an adequate job at stretching the field both vertically and horizontally. Back, who do you have the Texans taking at pick 25?
It's the same pick for me. They just didn't have to move up. I think Tyler Booker is a pretty chalky one for them as well. Their offensive line just needs starters, and I think Booker's probably the best interior guy in this class. Immediate production from the left tackle spot, and that's just one less that they have to worry about as they try to get the most value out of CJ Stroud's rookie contract.
And so at 26, I think you made the claim that Ben Johnson was the only one that could kind of scheme gimmicky stuff up for a tight end. Well, I think there is another guy that has schemed plenty around his different playmakers over the years, and that's Sean McVay. So I think he sees Tyler Warren and he goes, man, I have Devontae Adams, Puka Nacua, Kyron Williams, a really good offensive line, Matthew Stafford, who we have 1 or 2 more years left of. Why not we go all in and get a guy that I can scheme 5 to 10 plays up a game that he can just go out and dominate and just be an X factor on the field and be like, I would say, I'm not saying that their playing styles are similar, but like where you have a George Kittle in the division where it's just a dominant, just punishing tight end with the ball in his hands. I think you have that. And so I think the Rams take, in essence, best player available here in the 20s. Obviously, it's the second tight end off the board as Loveland went before. Where do you think the Rams are going with this pick? Are they content at pick 26 with any of the guys on the board, or they feel like there are offers to move up that make them inclined to move down?
Well, I like the idea of Tyler Warren there, and we'll get to who I have the Rams taking later because I do have them moving back. The Rams love to make day 3 picks and day 2 picks. They're probably the best front office in the league at making said picks. So when a team like the Kansas City Chiefs calls and wants to move up for a player, which the Chiefs often do, we've seen them do that in recent history with Xavier Worthy, with Trent McDuffie. The Chiefs in this case want to leapfrog teams like Baltimore, like Washington, and go get Josh Simmons, a guy that has the talent level to be their starting left tackle. They don't need him to do it immediately either because they gave sizable money to the guy from the 49ers, Jalen Moore. So they go up and attempt to, again, get their left tackle of the future. They've tried it the past 2 drafts. Hasn't worked out, but they're convicted so much that Josh Simmons can be that guy. If Simmons is healthy, he could be the steal of the draft. So really like this trade for them. I had the Chiefs sending pick 31 and a 3rd round pick, their 3rd round pick, not the one they got from Tennessee. And the Rams would send 26 and a 6th round pick to Kansas City to move to get Josh Simmons.
I already have Josh Simmons off the board. I think the Cardinals are starved for more Ohio State players, kind of employing a similar strategy that the Eagles do on defense with taking like simply Georgia players. So we'll see if it works out in the long run. I don't have Josh Simmons here, but I think if he is here, this is an excellent trade-up scenario for the Chiefs. You get a guy that could truly be a difference maker at the left tackle spot long-term, and that's good because you have Patrick Mahomes, who is going to kind of keep your Super Bowl window open as long as he's healthy. So that's the priority. I love how you have the Chiefs addressing that. I have them addressing the same position, just obviously with a different player a little bit later on. So at pick 27, we have the Baltimore Ravens. And yeah, if Tyler Booker was here, that would be the pick. If Malachi Starks was here, I think he would complement Kyle Hamilton really well. And a lot of people think like a Nick Emmanwori would be perfect here. I don't think the Ravens are sold on that. They have their big box safety, and I don't think they want a duplicate version of that necessarily on somebody who's a little bit slower on play recognition. So I think the Ravens go to a position that they've done every other year for the past like 5 or 6 years. And so a couple years ago, they draft Zay Flowers. A couple years before that, they draft Rashad Bateman. A couple years before that, they draft Hollywood Brown, all of whom were first-round picks. And so now you have the issue of Mark Andrews potentially not being a Baltimore Raven moving forward. And what was the last play we remember of Mark Andrews? Dropping the ball on the goal line. And so that drop, I think, is going to make them prioritize players who do their job. And you don't find another wide receiver in this class that does their job better than Emeka Egbuka out of Ohio State. You want him to block? He's got that for you. You want him taking screens? He's got that for you. You need him running the right route, being exactly where he needs to be at the right time? He's got that for you. And so when you're looking at kind of how Todd Monken has designed that offense, he seems like a perfect player to just seamlessly fit into what they're doing. Doesn't take away anything from Zay selfless. So I want that in my locker room if I'm the Ravens. And I think that really does take their offense to the next level to where they might even find another gear, which is kind of scary to think about when you look at last year.
I like your idea. Unfortunately, they're going to do what the Chiefs do and try to find a position of need, and they've failed at that over the last couple of years. They needed a young edge rusher, right? The 35-year-old August Siney has to stop. It just has to. That's not a sustainable way to be competitive when you have to play Mahomes, Burrow, and Josh Allen every year in the playoffs. And some younger players are on the rise too. So the person with the most juice left at the edge rusher position is Mike Green. He can be a designated pass rusher from day one, can get them I think you and I talked about, you said, and let me look at it because I wrote it down. You said 15 and a half sacks his rookie year. I don't know if he's going to get that, but he could get to 8 sacks in your rookie year, and you would feel really good about that from the 27th overall pick. And I think that can be a guy that they can finally solve the late first, early second edge rusher conundrum they've had. Odafe Owe has started to turn a page, but hasn't gotten the production you'd want out of him. David Ajabo, after coming back healthy, hasn't gotten the production you want out of him. So I think Mike Green can be the instant guy that can come in and get you some sacks, get you some pressures while you still try to be competitive in the upper echelon of the AFC.
If he's there, he fits Baltimore's culture. You want somebody that is going to be a dog, he'll be that dog for you. I love Mike Green's motor. If it wasn't for the off the field stuff, that's somebody that I'd talk about in the top 10 at pick 8. It's really just the off turns that I think are the big red flag. He's super high on a lot of people's board when you look at him as an edge. He has a lot of tools in his toolbox, lots to love. Now, we're at pick 28. You have the Lions staying here, but this is where I have the last trade on my mock happening. And this is where the Giants move up and they select another Ole Miss quarterback as hopefully the future of the franchise. And obviously I'm referring to Eli Manning as the first guy taken out of Ole Miss to play quarterback for the Giants. But this would be the second with Jackson Dart. And I think Brian Daboll likes what he sees from the interviews. There have been reports that the Giants kind of turned off with some of their last interviews with Shedeur Sanders. So if they're going to grab a guy, I think it's Jackson Dart. I think you can sit him behind some of the guys that you have right now in the quarterback room and Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston, not feel rushed about his development. And Brian Daboll can kind of take his time there while still remaining competitive. So I like this move. They in essence send a late or a day 3 pick. I think it's pick 105, sweeten the deal to move up a couple spots. And the Lions, I don't feel lose a lot of value because at the top of the second, I think they'll be looking at a Donovan Jackson out of Ohio State to help secure the interior of their offensive line while still getting another dart throw a little bit later in the draft. So that's where I see pick 28. How do you think the Lions address, if they stay here at pick 28, any need or potential abundance they have on their team that they may add to?
Well, they're going to be looking at a Donovan. I just think it's going to be different last name, different position, different side of the ball, really. Donovan Ezeraku, I think, is going to be a really good second fiddle to Aiden Hutchinson. he's been like a one-man army the entire time he's been in Detroit, as far as edge rushers go. He had Zadarius Smith for one season, I believe, and it didn't pan out too well there. So they get a guy in Ezraku who's not a super explosive athlete, but he has the pass rush moves, and he's very technical. He can be the second guy rushing against some of the right tackles while Hutchinson is dealing with some of the more athletic players on the left side. They really need that, right? Like the defensive line is just truly the crux of their needs, in my opinion. And looking at all the defensive injuries they had last season and seeing their depth get whittled down throughout the year, I just can't think that Brad Holmes is going to be willing to not invest a ton of high capital on the defensive side of the ball.
And he very well might. And we'll see that within the top 100 picks. Again, it's a deep edge class. Maybe they address in the first round, maybe they don't. Brad Holmes comes from Les Snead, and they haven't, outside of, I mean, obviously recently you can point to the guy they drafted this past year with the Rams and Jared Verse, and then obviously you draft Aiden. He allowed onto those teams with his front offices. So with that in mind, I think it is a good fit. It would be a great pairing next to Aiden Hutchinson. I have Donovan Ezeuruko going the next pick later to the Washington Commanders. And I think he is an excellent replacement to Dante Fowler. And the production they got out of him, I think Dan Quinn can get this Donovan Ezeuruko. And so that's where I think his landing spot is, or best fit is, and that's why I have him going to the Commanders. I do see him fitting in with the Lions if they chose to stay at that spot. I just feel like they want to add some additional draft capital, and it doesn't seem to be as much of a concern or need for them, especially when they were able to still replicate a decent amount of pressure with Aiden Hutchinson off the field. So I don't know if they think they can offset that with defensive scheme, but we'll see if anything changes with their philosophy going into the first round tonight.
Yeah, I understand that line of thinking. To me, Ezeuruko is more of a 2, like a high 2 than a number 1 edge rusher. And for Washington in particular, I think you need to chase number 1s if that's the way they want to go tonight from edge rusher. I have them trying to maximize Jaden Daniels' rookie window and taking Emeka Egbuka, kind of an underrated Ohio State receiver in the long echelon of Ohio State receivers that have been coming out the last decade. You know who else was like an underrated Ohio State receiver coming into the draft?
Terry McLaurin,
and he's done quite the job with Washington in his career. I think Egbuka complements him really well. I think he complements Debo really well. If you want to use Debo on some of your backfield stuff, there's not a better blocking receiver in this class than Emeka Egbuka. I think he fits in quite well and gives Jaden Daniels another weapon as they continue to push forward to be the NFC's best. You know why they lost in the NFC Championship, right? Obviously, they couldn't stop Saquon, but they also fumbled the ball, I think, 4 times. You're going to need to fix the offense before you can fix the defense, and I think this is going to be a big step in that direction, especially considering they've already done so much trade work this offseason.
I love this pick from you. I honestly think if Emeka Egbuka isn't taken with the Ravens, where I have them going, he could be taken by the Lions, the pick right after. He could be taken by the Commanders right here, and I think he's an excellent complementary piece to all of those wide receiver rooms, but especially the Commanders, like you're saying. So I think it's an excellent fit, especially with what Cliff Kingsbury would ask of him. And he would be exactly where he needs to in a very quick timing offense that was Jaden Daniels' strength. So I think, again, when you talk about best fits, this is exactly the best fit for Emeka Egbuka. At pick 30, we both have the Bills, I believe, taking a cornerback. The only difference is who that cornerback is. And the guy that I have the Bills taking, you had the Dolphins taken at 13. That's Jedi Barron out of Texas. Thinks he's a little bit smaller on the smaller side. But when you look at kind of how the Bills play defense, they play undersized. Like Terrell Bernard, some of these other guys in the secondary, your Cole Bishops, all these guys are going to be on the smaller end. And so I don't think that's a concern for Sean McDermott here. You have them going in a different direction, obviously, especially with him already being gone and off the board.
They play smaller with some of the later picks in the draft.
Yep.
Their first-round picks are all big guys. They're all not high raw score necessarily, but high measurables. You think of like Greg Rousseau, 6'7" coming out of Miami. And I'm going to continue to lean that. Josh Allen too. What 6'6"? I'm going to
And they took
continue to
Tremaine Edmonds. I could see
Edmonds.
Nick Emmanwori
Uh,
here potentially, but yeah, that's
Emmanwori works. Dalton Kincaid, I think, was 6'6" coming out of Utah. So the direction I'm going in is Trey Amos, the corner from Ole Miss. Going back to my first mock draft that I wrote for 2-point conversion, I said this could be like a sneaky fit because Brandon Beane likes these kind of players. And then over the last couple of weeks, we've gotten a lot of smoke that Amos might be a first round pick. The Bills really like Trey Amos. Maybe I like put it out there into the ether and the Bills accepted it and have decided that this is the guy. Who knows? But I really think it is a perfect Brandon Beane fit. Someone who has the athletic traits, but a little rough around the edges and can be molded into a high value starter coming from the first round.
I love that. The only thing that causes some hesitation, especially with the cornerback position in the first round, they went in Trent McDuffie a couple of years ago. He was a little bit undersized. They didn't get him. So they went with their typical prototype guy in Kaiir Elam. And that obviously didn't work out. They shipped him to Dallas this past offseason in a trade. So all of that being said, I don't know if they're just going to go with the best corner on the board. And if Jedi Barron is there and he has a better grade, I think the Bills take him. But
for sure,
all the points that you said about Trey Amos, it makes sense. Sense for Nick Emmanwori. They have all these smaller guys. They don't have a big guy. They haven't had a big guy kind of in the middle of the defense since Tremaine Edmonds. So it's like, do you want to try to replace that? And so they could go a whole bunch of different directions. We saw them last year trade out of the back of the first round. They could do the same thing here. So they could also move up and get a guy. Like I could see them moving up with the Vikings, getting a guy like Malachi Starks. I think that would work really well with Sean McDermott's defense. There's just so many moves right here within like 5 spots that I think the Bills are one of those teams where it's a little hard to predict based on players that may not be available and then what they want based on their board. So with that, we have pick 31. The Chiefs aren't picking here for you because they have the trade to move up and grab Josh Simmons. So now you have the Los Angeles Rams on the clock. For me, I'll say it briefly. The Chiefs, I have them drafting Josh Connerly, the offensive tackle out of Oregon. Obviously fixes a need very similar to where you had them taking Josh Simmons. And I think most people that are doing any mocks with the Chiefs have them taking a tackle. And because it's just, you got to throw a dart. You have wide receivers, you have talent on the defensive side of the ball, but if you cannot fix that left tackle spot, you're in a load of trouble. So I think most people have the Chiefs going there.
They haven't taken one of the Joshes, right? It's one of those 2 Josh tackles. I think that's going to be the direction we see tonight on draft night. I had the Rams moving back, and it's reported that over the past couple years, they've tried to move up for a tight end. Bowers was the one they were really interested in. Hasn't worked out at all. In this case, they moved back, and I think Tyler Warren was still on the board for you. I don't know if he'll fall there tonight, but they're able to get, I think, the next best guy and a guy who's in a tier of his own before the rest of the tight ends, Mason Taylor out of LSU. Only going to be 20 years old when he's drafted tonight. So super young player with a lot of potential. But he also holds the LSU record for receptions and yards for a tight end. So somebody who's already so young and already been very productive also does well under the lights. You remember when Jaden Daniels beat Bryce Young and Alabama in that overtime thriller a couple of years ago? Mason Taylor's the one who caught the 2-point conversion. So like he makes the plays who need him to make the plays. And I think if the Rams are going to be competitive, if they're not going to go the quarterback route, if they want to maximize the window now, tight end is like the obvious spot on their offense that needs improvement. I think they get the best tight end left in the draft at this point with Mason Taylor.
He's definitely going to be taken at the top of the second. I don't know if he sneaks into the end of the first. We both have the Rams taking a tight end. We have a lot of teams taking either the same position, same player. And I think that holds true for the very last pick in the first round. We have the Philadelphia Eagles looking into yet another problematic defender with just all this talent, but unfortunately has issues not being coached. Apparently he's uncoachable, even though he improved from last year to this year as a player, correcting some of the issues that we had with him as a prospect. So that being said, we have James Pierce out of Tennessee going to the Philadelphia Eagles, a guy that quite literally back in January, February, before the interviews, the combine, all that process started, was a top 10 pick. And so here again, the Eagles, after looking into Jalen Carter a couple years ago, are going to have James Pierce land in their lap. He will be an excellent replacement to Josh Sweat. and will be a fearsome speed rusher off the edge to pair with Nolan Smith and some of the other defenders they have on defensive line.
Yeah, I think he can do more than speed as well. I think his speed to power is really good. You should know as an analytics person, he's like the analytics darling of this entire draft. I think number one in run stop rate for edge rushers. His pressure rate is through the roof. And this is all in limited number of snaps, right? Because he can't get on the field for whatever reason. I think the questions, I'm doing air quotes for the people not watching on YouTube. I think the questions with him are more about football character than like character. Like, does he love the game enough? Like, can he work with different coaches, that kind of thing? All this stuff kind of really cropped up out of nowhere. So I don't know if there's any merit to it whatsoever. But again, the Eagles do luck into him here. Real quick, I don't have the Vikings picking in the first round, and I gave them Maxwell Hairston with the 33rd pick. He's invited to the draft, the corner out of Kentucky. He is invited to the draft, so we can assume he's going to go early. And teams love speed, right? All these speedsters always play themselves into the first round, regardless of their maybe concerns in other areas. We saw it with Emmanuel Forbes. We see it with Matthew Golden being talked about as wide receiver one now. If he didn't run the 4.29 at the combine, is he in that discussion? Probably not. And I think we're going to see it again with Hairston, who was this year's fastest player at the combine. I don't think he's going to hear his name called on night one, but he doesn't have to wait very long because he'll be the first pick of day 2 for me.
Yeah, no, and like I talked about with the Lions who are trading back to the top of day 2, I thought they would maybe take Donovan Jackson. So definitely players that fit needs for both of those. We talked about Maxwell Hairston a couple weeks ago when we talked about the corners. I honestly think if any corner is going to be like a outright bust, it's him. A guy that bites on routes, obviously, like you said, checks the speed box. So a lot of teams get like clued in on him. And I don't think he's necessarily as fluid as some of the other corners in this class. So all that being said, tonight is draft night. Hold on.
Well, yeah, real quick. That was a perfect take of yours a couple of weeks ago. And I know we glossed over our takes on Tuesday. I want to call out one pick from each of our mocks to be our perfect take. And something outside of the top 5, right? Because we know the top 3 or 4 by now. So what pick out of your 32 or 33 in this case do you want to lock up as your perfect take for tonight?
Perfect take for tonight. I don't think it's a pick that we made, because I was about to say that I don't think there are any picks in the top 5 that are traded. Everybody's thinking that the Jaguars are going to move off 5. It's necessarily as spicy because of how chalk things are early in the draft. But what I will say is I think there are no more than 2 quarterbacks taken in the first round, and that Shedeur Sanders falls out of the first. I will hold to that. That has been a take I've had. Not the 2 quarterbacks take, but the Shedeur Sanders falling, I think, is an appropriate one. Just saying no team wants to touch him in the first round. You have him going at pick 8. Not even 9, pick 8. So very, very high. So disparity there will be very interesting to talk about on Tuesday and see what is your take as we head into the draft.
Well, I'm going to pick a pick and lock it. I'm going to go back to the Buffalo Bills. I think if they're staying in round 1, obviously they could move up for somebody, but I think if they stay in that back quarter, we'll say back 8th, perhaps, Trey Amos is going to be the guy. I really think that that's the Brandon Beane type of player that he's going to zone in on in the first round and be like, all right, if we work it out with him, plus starter. And I really feel good about that one. So I'm going to lock that one in as my take, and we'll just see what happens.
That's a little crazy. You see, I was like Colson Loveland with the Chargers. I really love.
Well, I don't think Loveland will be there. And like with Sanders,
maybe he's not,
like I said, I wrote this back on Sunday and Monday, and recent stuff says that Sanders isn't going to go that high, right? Like he might at pick 21, that might be the Steelers taking him. But he might not go that high. But I really wanted to hit a back half pick that I feel really, really good about. And Mika Egbuka, I feel good about too, but I just don't know if he's going to be there.
I'd say so many great fits in the 20s, and that's where it's like, I talked about the Seahawks taking Matthew Golden. They could almost like double up and have like 2 of the same wide receivers with just JSN having a little bit more speed. And it's
who were teammates, so they know how to work off of each other.
Exactly. And so it's like there's just this whole slew of teams that could take him. I had talked in a previous mock, and this was like off air, but I think he could be in line for the Chargers. He could pair well with Ladd.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of different great places he could fit. Enjoy the draft, everyone. Hopefully your team drafts the prospect you wanted them to draft. Otherwise, scream about it, cry about it. I know if Jalen Walker's the pick, I'm going to be distraught, just about as distraught. I want to say probably like, I don't know if I've ever been as distraught with a first round pick since probably like the JC Horn draft. And that's simply because we go quarterback that fell right into our laps. And it's like, what are you doing? And so I don't know if it'll play out quite that same way tonight, but hoping everything goes well. Like I said, catch us next Tuesday. We'll talk about everything in terms of recap wise, both that have implications for the Panthers and then around the league. So we'll catch you guys then. Keep pounding.